back, everyone. I'm Nick. This is Swiftful Thinking. It is like 5 a.m. here, so I know I look really tired, but we're gonna get past that. In this video, we're gonna look at advanced Combine pipelines. So most of the time when we've used Combine so far, we've just fetched some data and came back with an array and published that array into our app. But one of the most important parts of Combine is that these publishers and subscribers can stay alive even past the first publish. So in this video, we're going to create a fake publisher that's going to publish values every couple seconds, and then we're going to manipulate that data with some really cool, unique subscribers. And we are back. I don't know if you can tell this just yet, but I did get a new microphone. So I'm hoping that the sound quality in this video and all the videos going forward will be a little bit better. As most of you guys know, I live in the middle of Manhattan, which is definitely one of the loudest places on earth. And I've been struggling with some of the background noise in my recent videos. So I do apologize for that, guys. I am working on it. I have some other soundproofing stuff coming on the way. But hopefully this is a little bit better already. With that said, let's start doing some of the code for this video. So in the last two videos, we opened up separate targets for our unit tests and our UI tests. We're not going to use those anymore, so I'm just going to close up those folders. Let's right-click the navigator, create a new file, and we're back to creating SwiftUI views. This time, let's just call this Advanced Combine Bootcamp. And we will click create. Let's make sure now when we're creating our files that we are only in our main target. We don't want to create more files in our testing targets. And let's click create and jump on in here. And again, this is the advanced Combine video. So if you don't know what Combine is, this is not the video for you. I have other videos on my channel in the SwiftUI Continued Learning playlist where we learn the fundamentals of Combine, the normal use cases of Combine. In this video, I'm going to assume that you already know the basics of Combine, and we're just going to jump into some of the more advanced flows and some of the really cool, unique things that we can do with Combine pipelines. So before we actually get started, we got to do some setup, of course. So let's create a view model for this view. It'll be a class Advanced Combine Bootcamp view model. Let's make it conform to observable object, and then we will observe it from our view with an @state object. And my autocomplete is not working today. I'm not sure why. State object private var VM, and we'll set it equal to the Advanced Combine Bootcamp view model. Inside the view model, we're going to hold a very simple array. We're going to call it @published var. Let's call this data, and it will be a type, and it will be of type array of string, and we'll set it equal to an empty array to start. For the majority of this video, I'm just going to use strings. We're not going to use any custom data types, but any kind of custom data type is going to work the exact same way coming through a publisher. And we're going to simulate, like, we also have another file in our project that is maybe our data service that is going to do all of the downloading functions for our app. So in this project, and probably pretty realistic in a real project, we're not going to actually download in the view model, but download into that data service. So let's create another class. I'm going to call it Advanced Combine, let's call it Data Service, and we will open the brackets here. And I just want you guys to notice again that this class is not going to be an observable object because this class is not being observed with any kind of property wrapper from the view. We make this an observable object again because we are observing it from the view, and we want those constant updates. Here, we don't need that. We don't need the view model to actually observe this entire class. Instead, we're going to add some subscribers in a second to observe specific variables within this class. And I think I misspelled Combine here. Inside our data service, we're going to have a init here. Then we're going to have a function that says, let's make it a private func, and we'll call it publish fake data. Open close parentheses, open brackets. Let's call that in our init here. And we're just going to basically mock like an API call, because in this video we're focused on the Combine pipeline and not actually focused on the API request.
So just to simulate that quickly, let's add a dispatch queue.main.async after. Let's do it after now plus 1 second. And then we're just going to publish some fake data. And when we publish the data, let's publish it through an @publish var. And let's call this let's just call it basic publisher for now. And this will be of type array of string. And we'll set it equal to a blank array to start. And then when we publish our fake data, we will say self.basicPublisher, and we'll set it equal to a new array. This would be like the array that you actually downloaded from the internet. I'm just gonna say maybe 1, 2, 3, just for 1 second. We're gonna change this up in a minute. So we're going to publish fake data. It's going to wait 1 second and then publish that data into this basic publisher. And I know this bit of code is not actually combined, but we're not focused on this publishing fake data in this video. We're going to be focused on the combined subscribers that are going to be in our view model. So basically, we want our view model then to observe this basic publisher. And I've done this in a bunch of videos. If you follow my crypto course, this is pretty much the same setup that we had there. So down here in our init of the view model, we will add some subscribers. Let's create a private func here called add subscribers. Open close brackets, open parentheses. Let's call that inside our init. So we add those subscribers and then let's of course subscribe. So we want a reference to this combined data service and let's initialize it inside our view model. So we'll say let data service and we'll set it equal to a new advanced combined data service. Again, if you're following this playlist, you're probably well aware now that we wouldn't probably initialize this inside the view model. We would instead dependency inject it into this view model because this data service might be shared with a bunch of different view models, a bunch of different classes. So we would inject it through the inits all the way down to the entrance of our app. But again, we're not focused on that right now. So let's initialize it here and then subscribe to it. So we'll call data service and we're going to subscribe to the publisher with the money sign here, the basic publisher. When we get these values through this publisher, let's just sync them. Let's do the completion and received value. I'll press enter on the completion and then we will switch on the completion. There are two cases here. We have case finished and if it's finished, obviously it's successful, so we'll just break. We also have a case failure, let error, so we can get an error if we fail. And for now, I'm just going to break. I think we'll use that in a second if we start failing some of these. But let's leave that there. And then here's the received value that we're actually going to get. So this will be an array right now of returned, let's just call it returned value. And in here, we're going to set the data that's on the screen, the data that we're going to put on the screen in our view model equal to those returned values. So we'll set self.data equals the returned value. And of course, as you guys probably were just thinking, this is asynchronous code. So this is returning not immediately, but whenever these values come back. And because of that, we have to add this self, and this is a strong reference to self, which is the class. But being the great developers we are, we're going to make that a weak reference. So we'll say weak self, and then self will be optional. And if you do not know what weak is, I have an entire video on it. Go check out that video on my channel. Moving on, we have these quick error messages. Let's get rid of them. This error, let's actually just print it out. We'll print out, let's put error, and then a colon, and then we'll just print out the actual error dot the localized description. That should go away, and then we need to store our subscriber somewhere, so let's import Combine, of course. It's a video all about Combine. We haven't imported it yet. And in our view model here, let's create a var, call it cancellables. We'll set it equal to a set of any cancelable. And we will open and close the parentheses there, and this subscriber, let's store it in our cancellables. Finally, on the screen here, let's actually put this data array. So coming down here, let's get rid of the text. I think we can do a scroll view, open the brackets, and then maybe a v stack, open the brackets, and in here we'll do a for each. open the parentheses. We are going to do, this is an array of strings, and strings are hashable. So we need the one with an ID so we can reference the hash value. So the vm.data we're looping on. And we're going to loop on the \self, which is the hashable ID for each string, and then we have our content here. And in Xcode 13, I guess they got rid of that like for X in code here. Usually it says like for item in, and we can type that in and have it still work. But just for brevity's sake, let's not include that, and here we'll just put in a text. And because we don't have that for item in, instead here we have to put in the money sign 0, which is going to be that value that we are looping on. Let's give it a font. Let's just do maybe large title, and we'll give it a font weight of black. I'm going to click resume on the canvas and get this VStack on the screen. And let's press play here. And should wait 1 second and then publish our values. So again, just to follow up with what we did, we have our view. Our view has a view model. In our view model, we have a reference to the data service, and then in the view model, we are subscribing to a publisher inside that data service. And when that publisher gets values, we'll receive them here, and then update the data on our screen, which is this published variable. And then if we look back in the data service, obviously this is just a fake data service. Now this is not Combine code, but this could have been Combine code that downloaded from an API, came back, and then updated this publisher. That part is irrelevant right now, but I wanted to just start out this video with this simple setup, because this is a setup that you've probably seen many times before. And this is very common in our apps, because a lot of times when you go and you download data from an API, it's going to return back an array of data. And then we can take that data and we can put it on the screen. And that's great for your regular get API calls. If you're going to just go fetch some data and then once it returns, you're done, you have all of your data, that's the most common kind of fetch request. But part of the magic of Combine is that these publishers can stay alive after they get a single publish. So in this example, we just get one publish and then we're finished. But this publisher is still alive, this publisher is still alive, we are still subscribed. So if anything ever were to publish here again, our whole flow would then update, which is great. So what I'm going to do now is convert this. Instead of holding an array here, let's just publish individual values. So this publisher, I'm just going to make a string. And instead of giving it a blank array as a starting value, we have to give it a default value. So I'm just going to put a blank string here. So in this function, I'm just going to take this array and let's just put it up here. We'll say let items equals 1, 2, 3. And then let's create a simple like for x in items, little loop here. And then we'll put our dispatch queue inside that loop. And instead of looping on the items, let's loop on the items.indices. And so this x will dispatch queue after now plus whatever the x seconds are. So the first one will have an index of 0, so it'll be now plus 0 seconds, now plus 1 second, and now plus 2 seconds. I think we just have to make this a double. And then in here, let's just set self.basicPublisher equal, and we're going to set it equal to items at the x index. All right, and now that this is just a regular string, we have to come down, edit our view model. So the return value here is no longer an array, but it's actually just a single string. So when we have our data array that's on the screen, instead of updating the entire array, we're just going to call self.data.append, and we'll add in that new element, which is the return value. So one more time, I'm going to just play the simulator here. And after 1 second, it's going to add 2 and then add 3. So here is just a quick example of how Combine can start to become really powerful because the publishers stay alive until we cancel them. So if there's multiple things getting published, obviously we can observe those and continually update our screen, right? So we got 1, we got 2, and we got 3, and these are all separate publishes. And the first thing I want to go over in this video is actually this published variable. So this @published wrapper is definitely the most common publisher that you guys probably see in tutorials on YouTube channels. But what really is this @published property wrapper doing for this variable? Not many people actually dive into the underlying publisher that we have here. So really in Combine there are two types of publishers, and the first one is going to be called a current value publisher. So if we didn't have this @published property wrapper, the way to write this would be we can create a constant and we can call this, let's call this current value publisher. We could have called it basic publisher too, but I just want to be explicit here. This is the current value publisher. And we'll set it equal to a current value subject. And we can see here a subject that wraps a single value and then publishes the new element whenever that value changes. So it is taking a value, whatever type we want to give it, and it will publish it when we send it through this publisher. So it also will become a publisher. So current value subject, and then we need to give this a type because this is a generic function and we can give it any kind of type, whatever kind of value we want to publish. So here we will add string, and then we need to give it a possible error because all Combine flows possibly have errors. We've dealt with this before. This publisher right here does not ever have an error because it's always going to be in a string. So we can make this never if there's never an error. And then we will initialize it with the open and close parentheses here. And as we do that, we're going to get a quick error message here that we're missing argument for parameter number 1 in call insert a string. And I'm going to click fix. And basically it wants us to put a string inside this open and close parentheses when we initialize this current value publisher. And the reason for that is because the current value subject is holding a current value. So the starting value we have in this basic publisher is a blank array string, and I'm just going to use that here as well. Let's actually even just prove that we're starting with that. So I'm going to make the first value that we get here, let's just put it first publish. Let's make that the starting value, and I'll put it here as well. I'm going to resume the simulator one more time before we're actually using this. And you're going to see the first publish is the first thing that comes through the pipeline. So when we set up this basic publisher, we give it a starting value, and then when we subscribe to it, the first thing that's going to get published is that starting value, that very first publish. So we have the first publish, and then here we are updating for 1, for 2, and for 3. So there's actually 4 publishers going on through this, and this is going to be the same thing with the current value publisher. This is the same thing as this pretty much. Here we have a publisher with a current value, which is going to be, it's going to start as first publish. So let's use this publisher now instead of this one. So I'm going to comment this out, come on down here, and when we subscribe, instead of subscribing to the basic publisher, let's subscribe to the current value publisher. And we don't need the money sign here because it works a little bit differently, but we have the current value publisher here. And then when we are up here and we are publishing our fake data, here instead of updating the value for the basic publisher, we want to send publishes through our current value subject. So what we do is we'll call self.currentValuePublisher.send. And here we can either send a completion or an actual input. And if we send a completion, it's going to come through this completion sync, and we can send finished or failure. But what we want, of course, is to send an actual value. So we'll send, an output is what we want. And it's going to be the items at that X index. So now let's click resume one more time. And we are now doing the exact same thing. This is nothing magic, but we have learned that we can use a current value subject. So basically, if we didn't have this @published wrapper, this is just a convenience wrapper. This is basically what we would be setting up. And this current value subject is going to hold the current value at all times. So it will always be holding a value in memory. And then we can publish through it. And usually when you set these up, when you go to an API call, it might have an error when it comes back. So a lot of times this is actually going to publish with an error here, and it's not going to be never. And the next one we're going to do is a pass-through value. So we'll say let pass through publisher, and we'll set it equal to not a current value subject, but a pass through subject. And again, we need to give it a type, so we'll do string error and then open and close parentheses. And you'll notice when we initialize this, we don't give it a starting value. And that's because our pass-through subject, our pass-through publisher, works the exact same way as the current value publisher, except it does not actually hold a current value. So this pass-through subject can be a little bit more memory efficient if the value you were holding here, so if this was like an array of maybe, let's say an array of images, and we had all of our array of images as the current value, that could be taking up a lot of memory space in your app. So if you didn't actually need to hold the current value in this publisher, because again, after we publish, we're holding the values in this data around down here. So a lot of times you might not need to actually hold the reference to that array here as well. Instead, you're just trying to publish them to the rest of your app. So if you don't need that current value to be held, we can use a pass-through subject, which is going to work the same way. We can still publish values. It's just not going to hold on to the current value. So here, let's use the pass-through publisher instead. And coming down here, let's subscribe to the pass-through publisher. Click resume one more time, and we're going to see that it works the exact same way. And from the screen, the only way we can tell that there is a difference is because we don't have that initial publish. So we don't start with that first publish. Instead, it's just going to wait for whenever it gets that first publish. So this could also be a great solution if you don't want those initial publishes to occur. Awesome. And now that we're getting a bunch of different publishes, we can do some really cool things in our pipeline. We can subscribe and manipulate our data in some really cool and efficient ways. But before we actually go into that, instead of publishing strings, let's publish integers, because I think publishing the integers on the screen will just be a little bit easier to visualize the publishes, because we can then see, like, as they come in order, we can see publish 1, publish 2, publish 3. So instead of an array of strings here, let's do an array of integers. And I'm just going to go from, let's create an array, and let's go from 0, let's do ... less than 11. So this array will be from 0 to 10, and these are, of course, integers. I'm going to make this an array of int. And let's publish these. So our pass-through subject is going to be of type int now. We can make this int as well, although we are not going to use this for a little while, so I'm just going to comment it out. And our pass-through publisher, let's send items at X. And now coming down here, we have the error because our data is an array of strings. So what we're going to do in this flow, before we actually get into the sync, let's just convert those integers back to strings so we can put those strings on the screen. So up here, I'm just going to call .map. And open the brackets here, and we will do we'll create a string with the from money sign 0, which is the value that's being published. I have gone over how to use these basic functions before, so I assume that you know this already. And let's run this one more time, just so we can see what's going to happen on our screen. We're going to get our numbers. Our numbers should be publishing through 0 through 10. So every second we're going to get another publish. This is not rocket science. I just want to create this streamlined publisher flow that we can then manipulate. So here are all of the publishers that we are getting one after another. So now we are set up for the bulk of this video, and I'm not going to really touch much of the data service anymore. What we're going to be focused on is we're subscribing to this pass-through publisher, and we are getting publishes which are the integers as they come through. And right now we're just converting them to strings and then putting them on the screen. That's great, but let's manipulate this pipeline a little bit. So I'm going to add some space here, and again, if you add space between here, this is not going to affect anything. Our code's still going to work the exact same. But let's look at some of the operations we can add to our publisher pipeline here. So we're going to start with something called sequence operations. And the first thing that comes to mind is that we can call .first. This is going to publish only the first element of the stream and then finish. So if I call first on this pipeline, we will press play, and even though we're getting all those other publishers, obviously the only one that's going to come through the rest of our pipeline is the first publish. Let's comment that out. We can also do .firstWhere, and we'll get the integer that we are publishing. So this will be the int. And we can set some logic for if we only want maybe the first, let's say the first where, let's return where int is greater than 4. So now it's going to listen to that publisher array, but it's only going to publish the first value that is greater than 4. Now we only get 5. So this starts to come in handy if maybe we're sending like a whole lot of data through this publisher, but we only want to pick out certain publishes to actually show on this screen. We can do something like this. Now we're going to do a lot of stuff like this in the rest of this video, and when we create these modifiers, obviously, this is the long form way to write it. We can break out to this closure, and we can put this code in here. But as I've reviewed in a bunch of my videos already, the faster way to write this is actually to just open the brackets, and then in here we could do $0 to reference the integer, and we can say is greater than 4. So I'm going to delete this first method here, and we're going to use this shorthand instead because it is cleaner and a little bit faster. The one exception for our shorthand rule is going to be when we use modifiers that might throw errors. So we can also do try first. And in here, we're going to publish the first item that satisfies the closure. So here, we're going to do try first. I'll click enter on the closure, and we don't need this modifier here. So this will be for the int, and this is a try first. The try notifies us that this closure can throw errors. So if there's a reason that maybe we get a certain publish here, if we want to throw an error onto the screen or something like that, we can add some logic in here. So in here, I can add if int, maybe if integer is equal to 3, we want to throw an error. And I'm not going to create custom errors, but let's just do a URL error. And we'll do maybe .bad server response, just as an example. And then down here, we can return maybe if integer is greater than 4. So here we are going to try to publish the first value where the integer is greater than 4. However, we have a little closure here that if the integer is equal to 3, instead of publishing the first value as whatever this is, we're going to publish a value that is actually an error. So if I run this now, we are actually not going to even get to this point of the screen because obviously 3 becomes before 4, and when we hit 3, we're going to throw an error, and that's going to be the first publish, so we never are going to actually publish this value. And just to prove that, let's put the error on the screen. So up here, in our view model, let's just create maybe an @published var error of type string, and we'll set it equal to a blank string for 1 second, and let's just put that on the screen. So I'm going to put it in the vstack, but below our for each. Well, let's just put if vm.error.isEmpty. So if it is not empty, use the exclamation point there. If it's not empty, if it's not a blank string, we'll put a text on the screen that says the vm.error. So when we run this publisher right now, we should actually see our bad server response. And finally, we need to, of course, when we get the error, we're going to set self.error equal to, and then let's actually put this string here, and then we don't. And then when we run our publisher, we should actually see the error that comes through. So we're getting this URL error that's going to publish and not this actual value. So here we have the error operation couldn't be completed. This is not very specific. We can focus on our error messages later. If maybe we take out the localized description, it'll be a little more specific. And yeah, here, so now we have NS URL domain error, which is, I guess, the bad server response error. But what I want to show you guys is that we can throw errors if we're getting specific publishes. Alternatively, if we change this code so that maybe the first integer so maybe we look for the first integer that is greater than the number 1, So this will actually succeed before we throw an error, right? Because the number 2 is going to get published before our number 3. So if I rerun this now, we still have our try first, except it's actually getting that first value that is acceptable, and we don't ever throw this error. All right, I'm going to comment this out. We can also do dot last. And when we call last, of course, it's looking for the last item that gets published through the publisher. And if we run this, you're probably thinking, well, the last item that gets published should be our number 10. But we don't see it on the screen. And that's because when we're doing the last publisher, we then need to know somehow when this publisher is finished. When is the last publisher? Because when we're subscribing to the publisher, it basically is going to be alive forever until we get some sort of completion. If we never get a completion, this publisher is just going to think there's always a possibility that something else could get published. So what we're going to do is come up to our publish fake data function, and we know that when we hit the last item in this index, we are done publishing. So what we're going to do is in here, we're going to say if, we'll say if x is equal to items dot indices dot last. So if it's equal to the last index, then we will call self.passthroughPublisher, and we're going to send not an item but a completion. And this completion here is exactly what we are going to get in our sync. So we can either send a finish if it's finished successful, or we can force some sort of error. So here I'm going to press the period, and again we can do .failure. If we want to force an error, we can add our error here. But if we get to the last one, we're actually going to succeed, which is .finished. So now, once this completion gets published, the subscriber would then know that the last thing that got published was the value right before we got that completion. So if I press play and wait 10 seconds, we're going to see that the last value now gets published, which is the number 10, the last thing to get published before the completion came through. Similarly, we can also do .last where. And I'll open the brackets here, and we'll do money sign 0, maybe greater than 4. So just like the first where is greater than 4, except this time we are again waiting for the publisher to finish, and then it's going to give us the last item where 0 was greater than 4. So the last item that 0 is greater than 4 is actually 10, right? It's not the first item where 0 is greater than 4, which would be 5. It's the last item that got published that fit this mark. If I made this maybe that is less than 4, the value that we should get here is going to be 3. And again, it's not going to actually publish and come through our pipeline until the publisher finishes. So I really want to point that out. The number 3 here got published 3 seconds in, right? Because we did our pipeline 1, 2, 3. But we didn't actually get it in as a received value until our entire pipeline, until our publisher finished and we got that completion. So although 3 published 3 seconds in, we still had to wait for all of the publishes, which was 10 seconds, and then the only thing that got published was the last that fit this criteria. And of course, just like the first, we can always try to get the last. And then here we'll get the int, and same thing we can say. Here we'll say if, let's take the code from up here, if int is equal to 3, let's throw URL error, .bad server response. Otherwise, let's return the last one where int is greater than 1. And here we are trying to get the last value that fits this. But if we do throw an error, we're not going to actually return the rest of this. So here, the integer greater than 1, so 2 got published before we hit 3, but during the lifetime of this publisher, we ended up throwing an error. And when we throw an error, that actually goes through and becomes a completion because we throw the error to finish up our pipeline. It'll pretty much end the publisher. So in this situation right now, although this is succeeding at number 2, although we're getting a value at number 2, once we hit 3, we throw the error, and that's going to be the last thing to publish. So the numbers 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 are not actually coming through here. But if I change this maybe to like 13, and we come through here, we're checking if we get this. So if there's maybe like a bad value that we don't want to get here, and if we get that value, we want to throw an error, then we can do something like this. But otherwise, it will return the last item that fit this criteria, which of course is our number 10. I'm going to keep moving here. We have a lot to cover, so I'm going to comment a bit of this out. Let's put our publisher back to normal. So we have 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the first thing that's getting published here is the number 0. But we can also call .drop first. And here we will drop the first publish. So literally same thing that our normal flow will do, except we don't get that first publish coming through. And this could be handy, this drop first, if we were using maybe like this basic publisher or current value publisher, and we gave it a starting value that was maybe a blank string, and you didn't want to publish that blank string. So you could drop the first publish because you know that first publish is going to be that starting value, which the blank string probably is not relevant to the rest of your app. But for this case, I just wanted to show you guys that we can drop the first publish. We can also call .drop first and add in a number here. So maybe we want to drop the first 3 publishes. So same concept, except 0, 1, and 2 are not going to get published now. And it actually makes more sense now to actually start at the number 1. So I'm going to change the array up here to 1 to less than 10. So the 3 that we're going to drop is 1, 2, and 3. And then we're going to start 4, 5, 6, and keep going from there. Comment this out. We can also .drop while. You'll notice here in the definition that this omits elements until a given publisher returns false before republishing all remaining elements. So if I drop while, and I'm going to do money sign 0 dot less than 3. So while it's less than 3, we're going to continue to drop these values, and I could change this. Let's do maybe 5. So while it's less than 5, we will continue to drop, and then eventually we're gonna get to 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. But what I want to point out here is that if we do the greater than sign, we're gonna actually get all of the values because the drop, as it said, is omitting elements from the publisher until the closure returns false. So the first thing that got published here is the number 1. And we know that the number 1 is less than 5. So the argument in here, looking for where the value is greater than 5, is returning false on that first publish. So once it returns false, we're done dropping. So this actually makes more sense really if we want to drop at the beginning of our publish and not at the end. So let's keep this as a less than sign. And of course we can try to drop, because sometimes we just want to try to drop. And we can say here if int is equal to 5, we can then maybe throw our URL error. Otherwise here let's return where int is less than 6. And again, when we get this, when we throw an error, it's forcing our completion to come through. So once that completion comes through, nothing else is going to get published. So we are trying to drop while the integer is less than 6. So we're continually dropping for 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. However, once we hit the number 5, we're going to throw an error, and because we throw the error, the numbers 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 are never getting published. However, if we maybe made this like 15, of course, we're never going to hit the number 15. We're never going to throw the error, and now we can continue to drop while the integer is less than 6, and then publish when the integer is equal to or greater than 6. So we can then try to throw an error here if we again want to do maybe some data validation to make sure that maybe there is good data or we didn't get a certain value, something like that. Moving on, we can also call .prefix, and this will give us a max length. This will republish elements up to the specified amount. So we can put in here a prefix of number, let's do 4. and we will get the first 4 publishes in this stream. So up here, I just want to point out when we did the first where, it was doing validation on the actual items, on the actual values. So this was giving us the first value where the value is greater than 4. But here there is no check. This is just give us the first 4 things that were published through this publisher. Alternatively, we can prefix while. Let's open the brackets and we'll do while the value is greater than 5. So looking at this again, we can read a little bit of the documents here, and we're going to use prefix while to emit values from the upstream publisher that meets a condition. And we can see the publisher finishes when the closure returns false. And they give us a little example here, but so here we're looking for a value that is greater than 5, right? So the first value that's getting published, the number 1. We know number 1 is not greater than 5, so the closure is returning false immediately, and then our prefix is actually done, and we can't really do much here. But we can, but alternatively, we could say while value is less than 5. And here we're going to continue to get those first publishes while this is still true. And now this seems a little anti-pattern because we could always just do prefix the number 5. But this would come in handy if you had custom data types here. So instead of looking for an actual number of less than 5, because then you know it would be the first 5 elements in our array. But when you actually get regular data that's in your app, you might want to prefix while a certain condition is true. So maybe while, I don't know, the messages are new to the current user or something like that. Some sort of condition that you want all of the first publishes while a condition is true. And just like above, we can always .try prefix. And I'm not actually going to do this one because there's a lot to cover in this video. Some of these are a little less common to actually use in your app, but you guys can figure out how to use them on your own time. And the last couple I want to go through is .output. And we can do .output at. And you'll see here that it's giving us an integer, and I don't want you to confuse this integer with the actual integer that we are publishing. If we were publishing strings or some custom data type, this would still be integer. This is looking for the item that gets published at this index. So if 5 things get published, they would have basically indexes of 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, and we could get the output at one of those publishes. So if we want the second publish, the index of the second item in an array is actually number 1. So what we should get here is just the number 2. So we're outputting at the first index, and obviously we can do any index. We could do the 5th index, which should then give us the number 6. And alternatively, we can call .output in, and then we can give it a range. So the range I'm going to do is from 2 ... and let's do maybe less than 4. So for the indexes between 2 and 3. So index 2 is going to be number 3, and index 3 is going to be number 4. And that's why we're getting these outputs now. So this is where we can start to really get unique if we have these really custom flows coming through. All right, I'm going to comment this out, and then I'm going to create a multi-line comment here with these asterisks, /, and up here I'm just going to / asterisks, and then let's Command Option left arrow to fold up a little bit of that code. Just so that we don't see it anymore, just so that we can continue working without this crazy long comment section. If you are confused about the folding it, you can always go to the editor and click code folding, and we can fold and unfold parts of our code. Below the sequence operations, we're also going to do some mathematic operations. The first thing we can call here is .max. So we can only call them max because the system knows that the values getting published are integers, which are capable of having mathematic operations. But the max, of course, that we're going to get published is the number 10. And again, I want to point out that if we don't throw in this completion, and we're trying to get the max value, it's never going to know when to calculate that max value because it doesn't know when the publisher finishes, and you need to obviously know the entire range before you can calculate which is the maximum. So we again need to always have these completions coming through. And this is probably pretty important if you've been trying to use some of these and maybe they weren't working. It might be because your publisher that you're subscribing to is never actually finishing. We can also call here .maxBy, and I will press enter here. And if I hold the option button and click on this, we can do a little bit of reading here that this is going to determine the maximum value of elements received by the publisher based on an ordering closure you specify. So here let's have int1 and then int2, and let's compare the two. So we'll say we'll return here where int1 is greater than int2. And we should actually be using less than here. So the maximum where the first thing that gets published is less than the second thing that gets published. And of course our publishers are going in order from 1 up to 10. So the maximum where the maximum is going to be 10. And let's go up to our items array here. So I have this array of 1 to 10. I'm going to actually just make it an actual array for a second. Let's do a 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So in this function, we're comparing int1, the first publish, to int2, which is the second publish. So if I look here, this is going to be the first publish, and then this is the second publish, and then the first publish, and then the second publish, and then the first publish, and then the second publish, and the first publish, and so on and so forth until we get to the end. First publish, second publish. When we look at 9 versus 10, 9 is less than 10. So where 9 is less than 10 is successful, and that's why the max is going to be the maximum that fit this criteria. But if theoretically, just for example's sake, maybe the value that got published here was 11. So if we run the same thing now, when we get to this point where we start comparing 8 is less than 11, that's true, but 11 not less than 10. So the maximum that fit this criteria is actually going to be the number 11. All right, I'm going to put this back 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Coming on down, and let's comment this out. We can also .try max, same kind of concept. I'm not going to go through that because there's so much to cover. We can alternatively do .min. So here, of course, you guessed it, this is going to publish the minimum value, which should have been the number 1. And of course, we got to wait till the end till we get that completion before we can calculate the min. And of course, it's number 1. Just like in max, we can also do .min by. So this is where the min fits that criteria, which I'm not going to do right now. And we also can do .try min, same kind of concept, where we can throw an error if we need to, and if we don't throw the error, we can get the min. I'm going to also fold some of this up, so let's use the asterisk and the /, and then in here. And then in here, let's / asterisk and command option left arrow, fold that up. We got our sequence operations, we got our mathematic operations, and I think we are cruising through Combine. All right. Moving on here, guys. Let's do the next section, which I will call filtering / reducing operations. What is the first that we want to do here is map, which we already are doing. I'm just going to put it up here so we have a reference to it. We can obviously map the values, and I'm not going to go dive deep into this, but basically we can transform a certain type, which we're getting an integer, and we are mapping it to a string right here. I'm going to comment that out, and we can also, of course, try to map it. So when we try map, it possibly can throw an error, and here we can have the integer. And in here, maybe we are going to return a string of the integer. But we could also have some errors. So if int is equal to the number 5, let's throw an error instead. So we'll do our URL, we'll throw a URL error, bad server response. So now if we watch this, we can, as we publish these, we are mapping them all. So of course we can map 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But once we hit number 5, we're going to throw an error. And because we throw the error and we go into that completion, we're not going to actually publish anything after. So even though number 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 do not fit this criteria and would actually convert to a string, we're going to stop once we throw that error. So here we can basically just make sure that anything that's getting published through our stream can correctly get mapped to whatever this is. Now, alternatively, you might want to try to map, but if something maybe doesn't fit your criteria, maybe you want to keep getting the rest of the publishes and just ignore the number 5. So what we can do, and I will do another, let's comment this out here. We can do a .compact map. And here I'll put the integer, and here we can add some logic for compact mapping, and I've covered it before. Compact mapping is basically the same thing as mapping, but if something doesn't work, we can just ignore that value. So here I'll do if int is equal to 5, just like we did up here. Instead of throwing an error, because of course we're not trying and possibly throwing an error here, if int equals 5, let's just return nil. So if int equals 5, we will return nothing, and this should be int. And then otherwise, we're going to return our string with the integer. So now again, we get our publishes, and we can get 4 and then 6. So the only thing that got avoided here is something that maybe could not convert to whatever type we wanted to convert it to. So this is handy if we had maybe some raw type from the API coming through and we wanted to try to map it to our local type. But if it failed, we just want to ignore that value and we want to continue to try to map all the rest of the publishes. So perfect for that situation. And I don't want to confuse you guys. Converting it into a string, we can do it like this. We can also do it like this, where we put the integer. It's the exact same thing. Well, let's keep moving on here. I'm going to comment this out. And we can also try to compact map. So same concept here. I'm not going to actually do that. But if we were doing this and we wanted to potentially throw an error, so we could have some logic to throw nil, we could have some logic for success, we could also have logic for throwing an error, we could try to compact map it. And that could be useful if maybe you had the same setup here, but if there was a certain item that got published that would maybe throw everything else off, we could then throw the error in that situation. Something like try compact map is definitely less common in apps. It's there, it's good to know that we can do that, but I would say when you're developing, I don't go out of my way to use some of these. It's more like if I come to a situation where the standard publishers are not working and we need to do a little bit of extra manipulation on the pipeline, then we can dive into some of these special unique functions. There's a couple more you guys probably already know. Let's put our regular mapping back in just to get our values publishing. We can also .filter. And filters, pretty self-explanatory. And we can add some logic in our filter. Maybe we're going to do filter where the value is greater than 3, and maybe the value is less than 7. And now we can get publishes, and of course we're going to filter for the values between 3 and 7. I'm not going to dive deep into filtering. Filter is obviously super important for whatever logic that you have in your app. And just like everything else, we can always .try filter, where we can then throw an error if we run into one, but we're not going to go through that. We can call .remove duplicate, and this is a really useful one. So if two values get published back to back that are the exact same value, then we can remove one of those because it's a duplicate. So this comes in handy if you have a really complex app where a bunch of different things might be forcing publishers into this pipeline. You might have situations, you probably will have situations where maybe two things cause publishers to emit, but the value that's getting published is the exact same. So if it's the exact same value and it's going to update, and we know that would then end up updating our screen in the exact same way, we then don't want to reload the screen twice. So we could remove, so then we can remove the duplicate publish, and we'll just add a little bit more efficiency into our app. So as an example, I just want to show you guys, let's do the number 4, and then we'll do another publish of the number 4. And if we didn't have a remove duplicates, it would publish both, but right now, obviously, it's only going to publish one of those 4s and then keep moving forward. Additionally, though, if we put the 4 over here, so it was not back to back, we're going to get this first 4, we're going to skip this one, we're going to get 5, and then we're going to get this next 4, because the remove duplicates, it has to be back-to-back publishes. And if it's not back-to-back publishes, then it doesn't consider it a duplicate. And this is actually a good thing, because if it's not the same back-to-back, then something changed in your app. And if it goes back to 4, maybe something changed back in your app. Whereas here, maybe it was actually just the same exact state in your app that got published twice. So we can see 4 gets published 2 separate times here because it's not back-to-back. I'm going to undo some of this. I'm going to leave that for 1 second, come down here. We can also remove duplicates by. So here we get the first publish, we'll call it int1, and the second publish int2. And the typical return here would be int1 is equal to int2. So this is going to be the exact same situation that we have with our regular remove duplicates. The difference here, which we can't really tell in our example, I'm not going to do it, but I want you guys to know that you can. And finally, of course, we can try to remove the duplicates. And if there's an error, and we can throw an error if we want to, but again, I am not going to do that. Some of these are really not, I don't think I've ever actually used that in an app, at least not yet. All right, so for the next one, I want to show you that we can also do some replace functions. So we can replace nil. So if the value that gets published is nil, we can then replace it with a specified value. So here I can put in whatever type we want to then publish instead of nil. And we're going to get an error because the pass-through publisher right now is just pushing out integers. But if this was maybe an optional integer and we have a potential for publishing nil, so let's put our array back to 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And maybe for the number 2, we want to publish nil instead. And let's make this, of course, an array of optional integers. And when we come back down to our app now, we can replace the nil values with specific values. So, and don't forget that we can stack a bunch of these. So if maybe we had some compact mapping, maybe we had some other mapping and filtering, and maybe some other sequence operations, and at some point in the pipeline, maybe a value converted to nil, or maybe we just published a value as nil like we did right now. We can replace any nil value with specified objects. So this could come in handy if maybe instead of displaying nothing, you wanted to give it maybe like a default value on the screen. So maybe you were displaying some sort of message to the user and you wanted to download that from your server, but if the value that got returned from the server was nil, so you didn't actually get the message to display, maybe you want to replace the nil with some sort of default message. That would be a good situation for this. Let's move this back to a regular integer. Just wanted to show you guys that. Let's put this as an integer as well. Similarly, we can also replace empty. Now, it doesn't make much sense right now. We're never going to publish an empty value, but this comes in handy if we were dealing with arrays. If we were publishing arrays and maybe one of those arrays was an empty array, we can then replace that with some default value. So oftentimes you'll see like an array here or a reference to another array that's stored somewhere. So give it a default value if we get empty data back. And of course, we can also replace error. Now it says integer right now, but let's actually force an error in our pipeline quickly. So back up here we have the try map, so let's uncomment that. So if the integer is equal to 5, we're going to throw the error, otherwise we're going to convert it to a string. So if I run that quickly, and we don't need the map at the bottom here. If I run that quickly, we should go 1, 2, 3, 4, error. Beautiful. And what we can do is call .replace error. So if somewhere in the pipeline we're getting an error, we can then replace it with the default value. So whatever you want to replace your errors with, and this might be a better user experience rather than showing an error on the screen. You give it a default value. But I do want to point out, once we hit that error, it does stop the publisher still. So we still hit the error here, and then 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 never got published. All right, coming back up here, I'm going to comment this out again. Let's get rid of our replace error, and let's put our mapping function back in down here. All right, guys, we can also scan, of course, and scanning. When we scan, we'll add an initial result. The starting value is going to be 0, and then we can click enter on here. And this first T is going to be the existing value that was being scanned for, and this will be the new value that got published. And here we can return the existing value plus the new value. All right, and this scanning value is really unique here. We can see the values that got published. I'm going to hold the option button and click on scan, and we're going to read a little bit about it. Use scan to accumulate all previously published values to a single value and then publish that new value. So here we are scanning, and we are scanning all previously published values. So at the very beginning of our publisher, we're going to start at the very beginning of our publisher. We don't have a previous value, right? So what we gave it was a starting previous value of 0. And we could have started at maybe, let's say, the number 5. So the first thing that gets published is going to start at number 5 plus that first new value, which is 1. And that's why we have 6 here. But generally, scans will start at 0, and then they will accumulate. So at the first publish is publish number 1. So the existing value is 0, and then the new value is 1. So we're going to return existing value 0 plus 1, and that's why we get 1. Then on the second publish, we're publishing the number 2. The existing value is the value that's being accumulated before that. So 1 plus the new value 2, which is actually 3. And then same thing, when we get to the next publish, existing value is 3, and the new value that's getting published is also number 3. So we go to 6. The next one, existing value is 6, new value is 4, and we get 10, so on and so forth. This is definitely less common, but this is really, really powerful stuff, guys. I mean, we can get some really cool things, especially if we are doing maybe some kind of algorithms with complex numbers and things like that. We can get some sort of almost like an exponential number system going on here. And just to show you, there's the quicker way of writing this, because it looks a little different. We can also just scan 0, open the brackets, and we can do money sign 0 plus money sign 1. So same concept. This is the exact same code as this, but a little shorter, maybe a little harder to read, but it does look a little more professional. This might be something you put in your code where junior developers will scratch their head, but you, being the expert that you are, knows exactly what it's doing. And there's even a shorter way to write this, which is .scan 0, and because we were just going to add the first and then the second, we can just put a plus sign. So look at that. Literally, like, this is like, what, 10 letters? This is like 10 characters, and we have this magic happening in our code. We can also try scan if we want to possibly throw an error, but we're not going to do that. And just like scanning, we can also reduce. So this works the exact same way as the scan. So we'll start with 0, and then here we can do the existing value versus the new value. And we can maybe add these together. So we'll return existing value plus new value. And it looks the same as our scan, except it's not going to publish until we are done, because the reduce is reducing all of these publishers into one single ending value. So here, instead of aggregating and then publishing at each publish, we are aggregating across the lifetime of the publisher, and once the publisher is done and we get that completion, we're going to reduce all of those published values into one final value. So the number 55 we're getting here is the aggregate of 1 plus 2 plus 3 plus 4 plus 5 plus 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, and we add all those publishes up together to reduce it into one single value. And that becomes in handy a lot of times when we're working with integers, or if we're working with some sort of duplicates that maybe remove duplicates doesn't work with, we can reduce those into a single value. Just like the scan, we can also just call .reduce 0 plus, and it will work the same exact way. Alternatively, we can .collect. This is going to collect all of the publishes and then publish them all at once. So here, let's map them to strings and then collect them. And the value that we're going to get is an array, because once we collect each publish, it's going to collect them, and then you can prove it here. If we try to map, we can see that the value that's going to come through is an array of strings. So although we are publishing individual strings, we're going to collect all of them into one single array and then publish that. So here we can set self.data equals the return value. I'll comment this out for 1 second. So we're publishing the same thing, and our first publisher is going to publish individually 10 times, but this publisher is just going to collect all of those, and then once it's done, publish them all on the screen. And this could come in handy if maybe you were doing a lot of like loading type stuff and you don't want to actually display it to the user until the publisher is done, until you collected all of the data from maybe different data sources or different APIs, collect it all, and then we can publish it at once, and it'll be a really nice user experience, because instead of having things load as they come in, we could have it all load once it's all there. Let's comment that out. Similarly, we can also collect with an amount, collect with a count, and I can put in the number 3 here. And now it's going to collect in batches of 3. So once it hits 3 publishes, it'll then produce the value. And it's changing because we are setting the data equal to the return value. If we did data maybe append the contents of the return value, we can see that they will all stay on the screen. So sets of 3 we're collecting and then publishing in sets of 3. And this could come in handy if maybe you had a lot of stuff coming in, a lot of different API calls, but maybe you don't want to actually update the screen and change things unless you collect maybe 3 new values. So if you think about like an Instagram feed, now they have a button where you can like refresh to get new posts. But if they wanted to automatically do it, they could maybe have some sort of collect on a publisher that says once there is 5 new posts, then go ahead and reload the screen or something like that. Moving on here, I'm going to comment out this. Let's move this mapping back down to the bottom. We can also all satisfy. So here I'm going to return all that satisfy where money sign 0 is maybe equal to 5. And we got to put our original append back in here. I'll comment this out because we are again back to publishing single values. So here we are checking if, and with all satisfy, we are checking if all of the items that get published satisfy this criteria. So here we know we do have an item that satisfies it with the number 5, but all of the publishes, 1, 2, 3, 4, are not fitting that criteria, right? Because they don't equal 5. So the value we're getting here is going to be false. But if, let's do maybe if all satisfy, maybe all are less than the number 50. Then once we hit that completion and we check, we should then have true, because we know everything that got published in our subscriber right now satisfies the condition that is less than 50. So we get the number true here. So this one I would say is probably less relevant for actually downloading the raw data. So maybe more common if you have child subscribers. Maybe if you could check if a bunch of different values all satisfy a certain criteria, maybe you show a certain button on the screen, something like that. So the value gets produced is true, but then we can use that value, the true, to actually do something a little more complicated. And similarly, we can try all satisfy. Same concept, except we can throw an error if we need to. All right, that's enough for this section. So I'm going to, again, asterisk / and up here, let's put in a little / asterisk and then Command Option left arrow to fold all this up nice and neat. And now let's look at some timing operations. The first one we're going to do, you guys have probably already done before because I did it in my crypto course. It is called .debounce. This is super common for when working with text fields. I'll tell you why in a second. We can debounce. We give it a specified amount of time. So for right now, let's just put 1 for 1 second. The scheduler is basically which thread we want to publish these values on, which we will do the dispatch queue.main thread. Definitely the most common, and then we don't need any options right now. The debounce is watching all of the publishes that come through the publisher, and it's only going to publish a value through here if there's at least 1 second between each of the publishes. So right now we don't see anything because we don't have 1 second between each of our publishes, but let's come up here for a second. And I'm going to actually just comment out our regular for statement just for a minute. And what we're going to do is put in a custom dispatch queue just to simulate this. Let's do this after 0 seconds. And we'll call self.passthroughpublisher.send the number 1 here. And I'm just going to copy this, paste it twice. This will be after 0.5 seconds, and this will then be after 1.5 seconds. And here we'll send the number 2, and here we'll send the number 3. So when we run this now, there will be at 0 seconds, we're going to send the number 1. At 0.5 seconds, we'll send 2, and at 1.5 seconds, we'll send 3. So the difference between these two publishes is going to be 0.5 seconds. And the difference between these two publishes is going to be 1 full second. So if I come down here and I make my debounce, let's make it 0.75 seconds. We're going to notice here that the number 1 never gets published. I'm going to press play. And we'll notice here the number 1 never gets published. That's because we are debouncing for 0.75 seconds. So we get this publish, and that's going through the pipeline. But then that publisher it's going to wait for 0.75 seconds to see if there's another publish. Because this way, if there's another publish, we're going to use that one instead of the first one. So within 0.75 seconds, we actually get this publish, which happens 0.5 seconds after. So because of that, the system is basically thinking, oh, we got this publish instead, and let's use this and ignore that first one, because the two of these happened within 0.75 seconds of each other, and we're going to use the last item that got published in between that time frame. Now, this might sound a little anti-pattern, like you might be thinking, when are you going to use this? But this is really common for text fields. So if a user is typing in a text field, every time they type a letter, it's probably going to publish a value. And you can imagine if users are typing really quickly, if you type in 10 letters quickly, back to back to back, you might then run your entire pipeline 10 times for each value. So instead, what you could do is add a little debounce, maybe 0.5 seconds or something like that, to wait basically for the user to stop typing, so that we wait so that the publishes stop for a second, and then we will do the rest of our functions. And that could save us a lot, especially if the rest of those functions were maybe making API calls or doing maybe some heavy lifting in our app. So here we have these two publishes back to back, but we're debouncing, so we only get the second one. And then the difference between this one and this one is 1 full second, which is more than our debounce. So both of these would then publish. All right, I'm going to comment this out and put our for loop back in just to get back to our starting state. Let's comment out the debounce. Next, we can add a .delay. And we can delay for, let's delay for 2 seconds. And we don't need a tolerance, the scheduler. Let's do dispatch main again. We also don't need options. So now we can delay for 2 seconds when we receive a publish. So these still look like they're happening 1 second to each other, but they're all actually delayed by 2 seconds. So let's try that one more time. And if I click play here, you'll see that it's 1 second, 2 second, and then all these start publishing. So even this number 3, it actually got published 2 seconds. It actually got to this point in our pipeline 2 seconds before we saw it on the screen, because then we delayed for 2 seconds and then put it out. And the delay could come in handy if maybe this loaded immediately and you wanted to add like a loading indicator for your content. You could add maybe a little delay or something like that and then publish all your values. Let's comment that out. Next, let's call .measureInterval. This is going to be a weird one. We're going to do this on the main thread again, and we don't need any options. And let's just see what gets published through here. And if I call .map here, we can see that the value that's coming through the publisher after this measure interval is of type dispatch queue scheduler time type .stride. So let's actually just transform that. We'll say here's the stride, and we want to convert it to a string to put on the screen. So we're going to say here return, and let's convert our stride dot time interval. I can get rid of this map for a second. And it's giving us in nanoseconds. We can go ahead and convert these to actual seconds if we want. But this is giving us the exact time between each of our publishes. So nanoseconds here, we have like, what is this? 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We have 1 trillion nanoseconds, which I think is pretty much 1 second. So we can see that the actual publishes are just slightly off. We know these loops are happening about every second because it's now plus whatever that integer is in seconds. But there is some nanoseconds between each of them because we're running through that for loop. So it's not exactly 1 second, but these, if we rounded these to 1 second, I think they would all turn out to be exactly 1 second, unless maybe down here it looks like maybe the simulator had a little bit of a lag. But we can use this measure interval, I think primarily for debugging purposes, but we can see the time between each of the publishes in our pipeline. Let's comment that back out, and let's also comment out this map here. Put back in our regular string mapping. And the next thing we're going to do is .throttle, which is one of my favorites. We're going to throttle for maybe, let's do 2 seconds. Let's do it on the dispatch queue.main again. And then latest, we will do true for now. Let's actually do number 10 for a second. So let's throttle. So we're going to open and close the throttle. So we can think about this as opening and closing the throttle. And we can open and close it every 10 seconds. So after we get our first publish, we are going to throttle. And we're not going to open that throttle back up for 10 seconds. And then at the end of those 10 seconds, whatever is published in those 10 seconds, we are going to either publish the latest value, which is true, or the first value. So I'll do false here. And after those 10 seconds, it's then going to publish the number 2, which was the first value. So we can open and close the throttle here if maybe we don't want it to just constantly publish as soon as we get values, but maybe we want it to just, every 5 seconds, every 10 seconds, we'll open the throttle and we'll let whatever new values came in within the last 5 seconds or the last 30 seconds, and then we'll publish them at once. And this is a good way to kind of batch your publishes if you need to. So here we have 10, but we could also do something shorter, maybe like 5. So every 5 seconds we'll get a publish, and let's do the latest as true. And then let's check this out. So we're going to get that first publish, and then we're going to close the throttle and wait 5 seconds, and then we'll see whatever is published in those 5 seconds. We'll get the latest, which is number 6. We're going to wait 5 more seconds for the next publish, and then number 10 is the latest there. So now we are not so much worried about every single publish, But if there were new publishes, we can open up that throttle every minute and publish them. And I think, at this low level, 5-10 seconds is not super common, but I've seen people do this even for like maybe minutes. If you're on the screen, maybe you don't want to reload all the data immediately, but maybe if the user's been on the screen for like 2 whole minutes or something, maybe it's time to give them a reload or something like that. And then you can open up Throttle, push out all those publishes, and then close it back up for another 30 seconds or whatever you do. All right, couple quick more things here. We can also call .retry, which I think I also did on the in the crypto course, which we can't really test right now, but basically if this was like an API call, and we probably wouldn't do it on a subscriber, we would probably do it like directly on the publisher that's fetching our data. But if that publisher was coming back with an error, we could retry it. So instead of just going straight to the completion and then putting the error on the screen, we could say, let's actually retry it. Let's try maybe to re-download the data, and we'll try that 3 times. So if we try 3 times and we get the error all 3 times, then let's go to the completion, publish out an error. But otherwise, if we get the error 1 time, let's retry and make that request 1 more time to see maybe if it comes back with a successful result. And lastly, on the same note here, we have a timeout, which we can give it an amount of time to wait. So we can wait 5 seconds for a value, and we don't need any of these options. We can come out the retry. Let's do a timeout of maybe 0.75. So we know these are actually publishing every 1 second. And we can see here that if we don't get a publisher within these 0.75 seconds, we're going to consider this publisher to basically fail, and we will stop listening. And if I hold the option button and click on timeout, we can see that it terminates publishing if we exceed that time interval. So if the time between the publishes is more than 7.75 seconds, then we will basically terminate that publisher. And we know our publishes are every 1 second, so of course we are terminating right here almost immediately. This really becomes handy again if you are doing like external API calls. Maybe you're trying to download somewhere on the internet and that download is taking a really long time. Well, you don't want the app to just wait forever for the fetch request to return. Instead, you would put this as maybe, a lot of people do like 5 or 10 seconds. So if the API goes out and it doesn't return in 5-10 seconds, let's just time out and not continue waiting forever. All right, that was a quick little section. I'm going to again do a multi-line comment. Let's do the asterisk and the forward slash. In here, let's do the forward slash asterisk. And then let's command option left arrow to fold this up. All right, so you guys are becoming Combine masters. We did sequence operations, mathematic operations, filter operations, timing operations. Now I just want to wrap up this section of the course with a little bit on how we can deal with multiple publishers / subscribers. All right, and the first thing we're going to do, which I also used in the crypto course a bunch of times, one of my favorite things that we can do with Combine is combine latest. And here we can combine the latest publish from multiple publishers. Now, in our example, before we do that, we need to update our example because our example right now, we only have 1 publisher up here, but let's create another pass-through publisher just so we can play around with a little bit of data. So I'm going to create another one. Let's make this let's call this maybe bool publisher. And we'll set this equal to a pass-through subject. Same thing, except this one will publish booleans, and we'll give it a possible error, even though we're not going to throw any errors. And when we are running our code here, let's see. And when we are running our code down here, I want to not only publish to the pass-through publisher, but let's also publish to the bool publisher. So in here, obviously we can only publish bools. So in here we'll say if, and then we'll add a little bit of logic. So I'm going to say if x is going to be our index. We'll say if x is greater than 4 and x is less than 8 maybe. Open the brackets, and if that's true, we'll self.boolpublisher.send, and we're going to send a value with maybe true, and then we'll say else self.boolPublisher send false. So every time we get a publish here, we're also going to get a publish on the bool publisher, which will either be true or false. So if it's greater than 4 and it's less than 8, so 5, 6, 7 should publish as true. Everything else should publish as false. So I'm going to come down to our section here now. Now I'm just going to refresh our page just to make sure our standard publisher is still working. So we get the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 all the way to 10. But we're subscribing only to the pass-through publisher right now. So let's also listen to that bool publisher. So to do both of those, we call .combine latest. And you can see here we can combine multiple publishers, which we'll get to in a second. But right now, the only publisher that we want to combine is the data service .bool publisher. So now this publisher pipeline is going to listen for the pass-through as well as the bool publisher. And the values that we are then going to get after this, it's not just going to be an integer, but it's going to be the integer as well as the bool. And that's why we're getting this error down here. So let's comment out this map quickly. So what we're going to do here is maybe compact map. And here we can transform. You can see we're getting an integer as well as a boolean, and we can convert it, transform it into some other type. So in here, this will be my int. I'll do lowercase and then bool. And then maybe we want some logic in here to determine how we want to handle both of these publishes. So we could do some logic to see if maybe for this example, maybe we only want to publish the int value if the latest publish from our bool publisher is true. Because maybe we're like manually toggling it or throttling it on or off. So we'll say here, if bool, so if bool is true, let's return a string of the integer. And then we can say else. So down here, if we don't return there, we can just return nil. So now the only values that publish should be the ones where the boolean is actually true, which is our 6, 7, 8. And here's a perfect example of when we might want to remove duplicates, because we can see here that the number 7 is coming through twice. And you might be wondering, why is it coming through twice? Obviously, we're only publishing the number 7 once. If we look back up here, we have to remember now that this publisher and this publisher are separate. So when we publish values here, it's going to emit and go through the whole pipeline. When we publish values here, it's going to emit and go through the whole pipeline as well. So although this is in the same for loop here, this publish and this publish are going to be separate. They're going to be two separate instances. Maybe they're back to back and they're maybe less than a second between each other, but they are two separate publishes. So when we get down to our code here, we're listening for the publishes here and we're listening for the publishes here. So anytime either of these get published, we're going to come into the rest of our flow. So on each of those loops, we're actually going to publish twice. And an idea here might be to call .remove duplicates, like we learned a little while ago. So here, same kind of concept, except we're removing if the back-to-back publishes are the exact same. And our output looks much cleaner. And I did just notice that the number 9 is coming through, and I don't want you guys to get confused. This x is less than 8. We're referring to the index, not the actual value, because we're starting here at number 1, which has index of 0, and that's why we see 9 here. So don't get confused by that. But coming back down here, this compact map, just to remind you guys, there's a quicker way to write that. So we could always just compact map, open the brackets, and so this would be the money sign 0, and this would be the money sign 1. So here we could say a ternary operator. We could do money sign 1 question mark. So if bool, then we will return string with the money sign 0. Otherwise, nil. And I will comment out this compact map here. And we'll get the same thing with a little bit shorter code, just get you guys more comfortable with these shorthand writing, because once you get into these once you get into these big combine flows, it's definitely important to keep all this nice, neat, organized, highly readable. I also want to point out here, before we finish up, that when we use combine latest, we are not going to enter the rest of this flow until we actually get a value from both of these. So If we are only getting these publishes and we're not getting these publishes, then we're not going to run the rest of this code yet. We need at least a starting publish from both of these. And an easy way to manage that, if you don't want to deal with it, is to start your publishers as current value subjects or as our regular at published, because those will have a starting publish and that will emit as soon as you initialize the value. But if you want to delay that until you maybe download and get some data and actually send that through, we could use a pass-through subject like we're doing here. And let's do another example here. I'm going to comment out the remove duplicates, or let's just delete the remove duplicates for a second. And the compact map again, right now we're returning the number. Right now we're returning the number only if the bool is true, and if it's not true, we don't return anything. But for example's sake, so we can get a publish every time that this comes through, let's actually just do otherwise and return maybe NA. Just so that we do get some publishes coming through every time something emits. And then we can see that some of them are the numbers, but most of them are going to be NA right now. And let's come back up to our data service here and let's create another publisher. We'll say let's call this int publisher. Set it equal to a pass-through subject with int error, just like our first one. Except this publisher we're only going to publish when we are between the 4 and the 8. So in here I'm going to say self.int_publisher.send, and let's just send maybe the number 999, doesn't matter. But I want to point out here that this int publisher, when we are on number 0 and number 1 and number 2, this int publisher has not yet published anything, whereas this has published on every single loop, this publishes on every single loop, but the int publisher is only getting published on the numbers 5, on index 5, 6, 7. So coming down here, let's subscribe to the bool publisher, and we can also subscribe to the data service.int publisher. I'm going to comment out this compact map, and we're going to have to write one more compact map here. Now you can see we're getting 3 values through here. So I'm just going to call this, let's call this int1 from our regular publisher, let's call this bool, and let's call this int2. So now we're listening to all 3 of these. So if all 3 publish separately, we're going to get, this is going to publish 3 separate times. So in here, let's do basically the same thing that we were just doing here. So we could do if bool, and if it's a bool, let's return a string with int1. And then else, let's just return NA. And what I want to show you guys is, and what I want to point out here is that when we press play, I'm going to wait 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then we're going to get those publishes. Obviously it's publishing 3 times now because each of these have separate publishes. But the big thing to point out here is that the NAs are only coming through at the end of this, and that's because this code is not going to execute until we have at least 1 publish from all 3 of these publishers. So this publisher obviously is publishing from the get-go, and so is this one on every single loop. But the int publisher, when we had it up here, the int publisher only publishes on the 5th index. So because of that, we actually aren't going to run any of this code until we get to that 5th index and we have an actual value for all 3 of these. So it's just something to keep in mind when we're using multiple publishers, is that we do need to wait basically for a publish from all of these. All right, so now I'm going to comment this out as well. And let's comment out the combine latest as well. Let's put our map back in, and the next thing we're going to do is .merge. So we can merge a publisher with another publisher. Now the thing here is that both publishers need to emit the same values. So our first pass-through publisher we know is publishing integers, and so is our new int publisher. So here I'm going to merge it with the int publisher. And we can then see what we're getting out of here. And we are just merging both of those publishers into the same pipeline. So this is great if you have maybe different classes that have the same type of data, but maybe it's coming from different sources or something, and you just want to merge them all together, combine them all together, and then just put that onto the screen here. So we can see the 999 coming from the int publisher that we set up, and the rest of the values coming from our original publisher. And we can also, let's comment that out, we can also .zip. This is a lesser known command here, and we can use multiple publishers here. But one thing that we need to realize is that this combines elements from two publishers and delivers them as tuples. And let's do a quick zip here. So I'm going to press enter on the publisher here. And we're going to add in our bool publisher. So if we look back up at the top here, we know that on every loop, we're going to publish the integer. And on every loop, we're also going to publish either true or false. So there should be, at the end of this, there should be 10 integers publishing here and 10 booleans publishing through the bool publisher. So here we want to zip those two publishers together. So instead of compact mapping and turning them to another type, we're basically just going to zip them together to create one published value that is a tuple. So here we could call .map, and let's do the transform, and you can see there's an extra parentheses inside here. That's because this is coming through as a tuple now. So I'll call this my tuple. And here we can do some mapping. So I can return, and the tuple will then have a value with 0 as being the integer that came through, and then 1 being the boolean. If we look at self, we can see the two values here. So this is one publish that has an integer and a boolean. So it's like if you were creating a custom data type, and that data type might have maybe like an integer and then a boolean inside of it. This is the same thing. So we have a tuple that has an integer and a boolean, and this is different than the compact map here. Here, this integer, this boolean, and this integer are separate publishes, and then we are going to map them, convert them to some type to output. Here, we are zipping the different publishes together so that only one value gets published, and it is a tuple, and that one value then contains an integer and then a boolean. So here we could do money sign dot 1 is the integer, and we can just convert that to a string like so, and we can get our code back on here, and we can actually do maybe plus the tuple dot 1 dot description, so the description of the boolean. So we can see here that we are publishing 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So now we learned how to zip, and let's do one more zip because we can do multiple publishers. So let's also zip it with our data service .int publisher, and then here after the description I'll add a string for maybe the tuple dot 2, which should be that final integer. And I wanted to point out here that when we zip, we need I want to point out here that when we zip, we need the same amount of publishes from each of these publishers. So we are creating tuples, but we can only create a tuple 3 times in this scenario because the int publisher is only publishing 3 times. So we can't create this tuple unless we have a value from all 3 publishers. And this is really important. So it's really important here when you're zipping to make sure that you have basically a 1-to-1 ratio of each of these publishers. So if the first one's publishing 10 times and the second one is publishing 10 times, probably want the third one to publish 10 times, unless of course you want the outcome to be the minimum published amount of all 3 of them. All right, let's put this map back in here, and the next one we're going to do is .catch. And we can see here that here we can catch errors and return a publisher. So what this is if we get errors, we can actually refer and return values from a different publisher. So if one publisher is failing, we can have a backup publisher or maybe another publisher somewhere in our code. So in here, let's press enter, and this will be the error. Now, of course, for example's sake, let's actually force an error. So here I'm going to try map, and this will be an integer, and we're actually not even going to use the int. Because we're going to try map, we can throw, and let's just throw a URL error bad server response. So all 10 publishes right now will just be forced into publishing a URL error, and then we can catch. And here, as it said, is we can return a publisher. So here we can return self dot, and I'm going to return the data service dot int publisher. So if we get an error from our first publisher, we can actually catch and then use this next publisher for the rest of our data flow here. So I'm going to press play, and on that first publish, and on those first publishes, we're going to catch and throw errors. And then once the int publisher is ready and starts publishing, we're going to be using the int publisher instead of our original publisher. So we are catching those errors. And just to give another example here, we'll say maybe if, let's add back in our integer, if int is equal to 5, we'll throw, and then otherwise we'll just return the int. So we get our regular publishes, and then once it throws an error, instead of throwing the error, let's switch and pop into our int publisher. Now again, once we throw that error, we are completing the flow for that publisher. So we're not going to get those final publishes at the end because we've now switched to the int publisher. All right, guys, a lot to cover here, but we are almost done. Do not worry. I hope you guys are following and understanding what's going on, because this is definitely a pretty complicated topic. Let's wrap this up here, this section, this little bit of code at least. I'll use the multi-line comment with the / asterisk and then a asterisk / at the bottom, and then up here let's Option Command left arrow to fold up our code. We have a little bit more to cover. We are not done here, even though we're folding up the code. For this next one, I'm going to delete this bit of code here. I want to let's clean this up a little bit. So I'm going to leave so this publisher, I'm going to copy it. I'm going to comment out this first one, and let's just move it down here so it's all together in one piece of code. And we're going to ignore all the stuff we have in here for now. So this is the only code that we are subscribing to right now. And this is great when we have just one place where we want to receive this value. But what if we wanted to share this value and maybe update different view models, or update different screens, or maybe just different arrays? And maybe we want the values to come out of this publish. Maybe it's the same publish, but we want to map those arrays differently so that maybe one subscriber is turning these into strings, another one's maybe turning them into booleans, who knows. So what we're going to do is on the screen, let's first create another, let's call this data bools, and this will be an array of boolean. And let's copy this and then add it here. So I have two separate subscribers, and in this one we are just going to do some mapping to convert it into booleans. So in here I'm just going to say if $0 is greater than, let's do greater than 5, let's map it to true, otherwise false. And we are going to then get the returned value, which will be a bool, so we'll call our data bools.append that returned value. And finally on the screen, let's do a different for each loop. So we have our VStack. Let's put the VStack inside maybe an HStack. And let's copy this VStack and then do another one so it's on the right of it. We don't need the error here. And let's do for the data bools, and we'll put in the bool.description. So now as we get these publishes, we have two separate, totally separate subscribers. So this subscriber is totally separate from this one. So they're listening to the same publisher. It's the same pass-through publisher, but all of this subscriber flow is totally separate from this one, even though it's dealing with the same original publisher. And this is cool that we can do this and subscribe multiple times, but this might not be as efficient or even as elegant as really just what we want to do is only listen and subscribe to this publisher once, but we want to then share that published value to two different locations. So instead of two separate subscribers, we want one subscriber that's subscribing to the publisher and then basically we fork from there with the values, and we can send those in different directions. So what I'm going to do is actually up here, let's say let shared publisher, and we'll set it equal to the data service dot pass through publisher. And we could even do some kind of manipulation on this pass-through publisher if we want. So for example, maybe we want to drop the first 3 items. So 1, 2, 3 don't get published maybe. So we can do manipulation on this data before we share it. And then instead of subscribing directly to the publisher itself, we can subscribe to this shared publisher on both of these flows here. So we drop the first 3, and then we share this publisher to 2 separate subscribers. But these subscribers are subscribing to this publisher, not to the one that's actually in our data service. So this way we can do a little bit of manipulation first, and then share the outcome. But the one caveat here is obviously this works, and we can't really tell here, but what we need to actually do is call .share here. And here we can share the output of an upstream publisher to multiple subscribers. So it's pretty much the same thing, except now we can confirm that we are really sharing this publisher. So whatever output is coming through here, we are going to this, and then we're going to this. And now we get our data on the screen, and we are sharing a publisher. So this is often what you want to do if you have multiple routes, where if you're listening to a single publisher, and where if you have maybe a view model that's listening to a single publisher, and then you want to take those publishers and then do different things and not just receive one value, but change it up. Maybe one affects your loading indicator, maybe one affects your data source or something like that. We can share it. All right, and a final thing that I want to go over here, which I am definitely not an expert on this subject, with sharing and multicasting. I want to show you guys what I know about. I think there's probably much more to multicast than I've ever dived into, but I know multicast is often used along with the share function. When we use a multicast, we basically can create another publisher, another pass-through subject publisher that can hold a reference to the publishes coming through this publisher. So for example, I can do a multicast, and I will create a subject here. We'll create another pass-through subject with an integer and an error, same type that we are publishing through. And then when we're running our simulator here, we can see that nothing is publishing. You're probably wondering why. And that's because when we add multicast, it makes this publisher a connectable publisher. So all the publishers that we've been using that we normally use are auto-connected. So an auto-connected publisher will automatically connect and automatically start publishing the data. So all your subscribers will automatically get all of those publishes. But when we do a multicast, we can basically, I don't know if it's exactly what it's doing, but we can basically store the publish in another publisher here. And then we can determine programmatically when we want to actually connect to this publisher. So coming down here, I'm going to add maybe a dispatch queue.main.async after. Let's do it after now plus 5 seconds. And after 5 seconds, let's reference the shared publisher. Let's call .connect. So we're going to connect to the publisher after 5 seconds. And now we need to store this as well in our cancellables. And I think we have to store it because it might be storing this new publisher here. I'm not 100% sure, but now if we run our code here, so we're not going to be connected to the publisher for the first 5 seconds, and after 5 seconds we'll connect into that publisher. And let's remove some of this logic here. So the drop first, we don't really need that anymore. I'm just going to comment that out. And let's now press play on the simulator. So we're subscribed, but it's not connected yet. And then after 5 seconds, it's going to connect. And then we can see the publishers start coming through. So we can delay connecting to the publisher if we need to. And this is pretty helpful when you have maybe multiple subscribers and you don't want some of them to start immediately. You can programmatically connect into the publisher at a specific time. So here we connected, and after we connected, it published 7, 8, 9, and 10. And another way to do this, if we didn't want to add in the pass-through publisher here, we could, at the top of our file, we could set up maybe another let's call it multicast publisher equals the pass-through subject, and we can then come down here and do multicast. I'll comment that out actually so that we have the reference to it. And we can do multicast with a subject, and we can pass in our multicast publisher. So same thing now, and we are connecting after a delay to our publisher flow. From what I've read, it should be used along with a share, because this is obviously when you're using multiple subscribers and maybe you want to delay one of those subscribers or a couple of those subscribers and then connect later. But I'm definitely not an expert on the share and multicast, and I'm not 100% sure on the full difference between the two. I'm sure there's much more that I don't know about, but this is probably enough for you guys to get going in your apps. This is a relatively rare case because you got to be doing some really complex stuff with Combine to actually need this. And if you ever get confused with doing a multicast, you can always kind of just share and then subscribe multiple times and add delays, and there's a lot of other quirky things that you guys can figure out. Alright guys, so that was my little section on advanced Combine pipelines. There is more, believe it or not, to Combine that I have not covered. And I'm probably not going to cover because I think this is more than probably enough. You could definitely build plenty of apps without having to learn anything more. But if you want to dive deeper into Combine, I do have a reference here that I want to share with you guys. It is heckj.github.io/SwiftUI-notes. And if you just Google like SwiftUI Combine, this will probably be one of the first results. This is a phenomenal resource to learn and dive deeper into Combine. Most of what I've covered is covered here as well, and it's very structured. I definitely read through all of this before creating any of these videos, but they have some really nice images and diagrams to really explain some of these publishers and subscriber flows. And there's this awesome table of contents where we can just jump into some different things. So there are more, such as futures, which I'll cover in the next video. We have record, deferred, which I have not really covered, but there is more to Combine. So if you want to dive deeper, this is a great resource for you guys to check out. So with that said, you guys are now Combine experts. If anyone asks how to use Combine, I hope that you have an answer, because we have created some really, really cool flows here. We've done a sequence, mathematic, filter, timing, operations, and then we dealt with multiple publishers and subscribers, which pretty much should cover the vast majority of situations in your app. And if you have a situation that maybe wasn't covered here, you can leave a comment below, but chances are maybe you're thinking about the problem the wrong way, maybe not the way that we should do it in Combine. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. I would love to hear your comments below, whether or not maybe this was challenging or too hard, maybe this was super helpful. I don't really know, but I do know that going into some more advanced apps now, we can start using some pretty complex publisher flows, and when we start coding like this, we can get some really nice, elegant, efficient code, which is going to be awesome. Thank you guys for watching. As always, I am Nick, this is Swiftful Thinking, and I will see you in the next video.